Hey guys, I put together this video to help you with the 4 questions on 11B for your homework, okay? We are having a lot of questions. So the first problem is 1/2 plus -3/7. Okay, when you're adding fractions, it's really important when you're adding and subtracting fractions that you get a common denominator. Okay, so a common denominator is only needed for adding and subtracting. You don't need it for multiplying and dividing. So in this case, I've got 1/2 and I've got -3/7. I prefer to set mine up vertically because then when I get a common denominator, in case it would be, this case it would be 14, okay, it makes it easy for me to then come up with my equivalent fraction. So you have to then get equivalent fraction for the fraction with the new denominator. So 2 times 7 would be 14. So if you multiply the bottom by 7, denominator by 7, you have to multiply the numerator. So 1 times 7 is 7. So 7/14 is an equivalent fraction for 1/2. And then we're going to do the same thing for 3/7. Only 7 times 2 is 14, so 3 times 2 is 6. And in this case, we're adding a negative, so it's a -6. All right, so now we just look at the numerators. 7 plus a -6 would be 1, and the denominator would stay the same. So that's 1/14. Okay, so that works for adding and subtracting. So let's jump over to number 15, since that's how we're going to do it with 15. If you look at, we've got the fraction 2/5 minus 12/13. So the common denominator you could get would be, you could just take 13 and multiply it by 13 times 5, and you're going to get 65. So this would be 65. So let's set this up as 3/5, okay, minus 12/13, but let's use 65 as a common denominator. Okay, so in this case, 5 times 13 is 65, so 3 times 13 would be 39. So our equivalent fraction would be 39/65, and then for the denominator, we've got 13 times 5 would be 65, so 12 times 5 would be 60. So now we just look at the numerators. 30 minus 60 would be 21, or -21, and it would be 65, and that would be our answer. Okay, so adding and subtracting, you need a common denominator, and then you can get your equivalent fraction. All right, multiplying is actually pretty easy. The thing with multiplying, we'll do number 16 first, and then we'll jump back to 14. For number 16, we're multiplying 2 1/4 times 4/7. Well, now one of the common mistakes with fractions is students usually try to keep the mixed number. You have to turn it into a improper fraction. So to do that, I'm going to take 2 1/4. I take the denominator, multiply it by the 2, and I get 8, and then I add 1, 9, and then the denominator stays the same. So 2 1/4 as an improper fraction would be 9/4. And then I'm going to multiply that by 4/7. Okay, now multiplying fractions is actually very easy. You just multiply straight across, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. But in some cases, you can actually simplify first to make it easier so you don't have to reduce. So if I did this, I would get 36/28, okay? But it's not in simplest form. If I took 9/4 and I multiplied it by 4/7, and I said, oh, 4 divided by 4 is 4, I could cancel out both of these 4s, and I could get 9/7. To me, that's easier than knowing to divide 36 by 4 and 28 by 4 to get the simplified fraction of 9/7. Okay, now jumping back to 14, 14 is a division problem. Now remember, with division problems, you actually turned it into multiplication and you multiplied by the reciprocal. So the first fraction would stay the same, it would be 4/5, and then the division would change to multiplication, and then the second fraction, the divisor, would change to 9, we take the reciprocal, it would be 9/2. And don't forget, it's negative. So when we go straight across, 4 times 9 is -36, and then 5 times 2 is 10. But then we simplify that to be -18/5. Okay? Again, we could have taken that and we could have simplified it first, all right, before we multiplied. So in this case, I'd say, oh, well, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and then I can multiply straight across and I'd get my -18/5. Okay? All right, I hope that helped you with your homework and that you just don't try to skip the last 4 problems.